driven by a hunger to uncover the mysteries of ancient civilizations and to echo the legacy of cultures lost to time. Reduced to mere legends, the world of archaeology was thriving in the early 1970s. With the rise of new and more sophisticated methods of excavation and dating, archaeological discoveries in South America began to shift perceptions about the ancient civilizations of the continent. Many studies revealed that the development of pre-Columbian cultures, particularly in the Amazon rainforest, had been profoundly underestimated. These discoveries rekindled fascination with one legend in particular, a myth that spoke of a lost city hidden deep within the South American jungles, of colossal temples and palaces gleaming with the radiance of a sacred metal under the sun, a driving force behind an obsession that spanned oceans, destroyed empires, and ignited the cruelest greed in men. The legend of a city bathed in gold, sought for centuries by conquerors and explorers chasing dreams of fortune, glory, and eternal power. A forgotten place, shrouded in the shadows of the jungle's heart, christened by us as El Dorado. Tales of a golden kingdom, leaving behind a trail of ruin and death, seemed to fade over time. Until, against all odds, the legend resurfaced once again. Amid this renewed interest in the legacy of pre-Columbian cultures, Colombian-Austrian anthropologist and archaeologist Gerardo Reichel Dolmatov conducted research on the Muisca, an indigenous civilization that once thrived on the Cundiboyacen's highlands in central Colombia. This society was renowned for its advanced social organization, complex spirituality, and above all, its unique relationship with gold, a material with profound symbolic importance. It was here that the roots of the El Dorado legend were unearthed, sparking a renewed academic interest in what many had dismissed as a mere tale, a modern rediscovery of the myth. In 1973, Gerardo published a detailed study on a Muisca ritual, a sacred spiritual ceremony symbolizing the connection between the people and their gods, celebrated at Lake Guatavita in Colombia's eastern Andes. This sacred site was the setting for a ritual in which a new leader, known as the Zipa, ascended to power, renewing the alliance with the divine. The new chief underwent a process of spiritual purification before being crowned. Only one material could facilitate this cosmic balance, a metal not used as currency or a symbol of wealth, but as a representation of the gods who bore light and vital energy. Its value was not monetary, it was purely sacred. In this ceremony, the chief's body was covered in fine gold dust, symbolizing sunlight and his transformation into a sacred figure. He would then board a raft accompanied by priests bearing offerings of gold and emeralds. As the raft glided to the center of the lake, the people cast their offerings into the water, awaiting the moment when the chief, the Golden Man, would immerse himself in the lake, washing the gold dust from his body. The offering to the gods was complete, a return of riches to the sacred waters, and the renewal of the pact between the ruler and the divine. El Dorado was this man bathed in gold, the central figure of a ceremony belonging to a civilization that thrived between 600 and 1600 CE, reaching its peak just before the arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century, a pivotal turning point in history. The Muisca ritual was likely interpreted by Europeans as evidence of immense wealth. The image of a ruler covered in gold and a lakebed filled with offerings of the precious metal they so coveted was powerful enough to ignite the greed of the Spanish conquistadors, who heard only one word: gold. The ritual was seen as proof that the Muisca had access to vast quantities of gold, far beyond what had been discovered thus far. As the conquistadors recounted their findings and explorations, the story of the Golden Chief grew more exaggerated. The accounts of the ceremony slowly transformed into rumors of a mythical city brimming with unimaginable riches. Stories that fed the desires, dreams, and greed of Europeans, embellished with increasingly invented and outlandish details. until El Dorado ceased to be a human figure and became a golden kingdom. A city of temples, palaces, and streets paved with gold, hidden somewhere in the depths of the New World. What began as a simple ritual had evolved into a destination to be uncovered. This version of El Dorado became entrenched in the collective imagination of the conquistadors, symbolizing humanity's selfish obsession with wealth and the discovery of uncharted lands. Thus, the legend of the lost city of gold was born. A myth that, through the Austrian anthropologist's study, had reached its second golden age. After a long time of dismissing the stories as mere fables, the archaeological community had turned its gaze once more toward that lost kingdom in space and time. It was time to understand the nature of the legend, to walk that path where the blurred line between myth and reality vanishes, and dreams of El Dorado converge into terror. At the beginning of the 20th century, Bolivia and Brazil were embroiled in a conflict over the Amazon due to access to rubber resources, a material becoming increasingly valuable due to its growing use in the automotive industry. Its demand had sparked tensions between both nations, each claiming vast Amazonian territories rich in this raw material. Lacking detailed maps, the disputes were far from being resolved. In this context, the Royal Geographical Society received a request from the Bolivian government to send a team of experts to accurately demarcate the borders and end the conflict. Known for his skills as a cartographer, the English archaeologist and explorer Percy Fawcett was chosen to lead this diplomatic mission. He was the ideal figure to head such an expedition, one that would face the extreme conditions of the Amazon rainforest and the threat of encounters with hostile indigenous tribes. But with his heart driving him toward exploration, Percy accepted the offer and traveled to South America to map the borders of Bolivia with Brazil and Peru. During his travels, he heard stories from indigenous peoples and local explorers about cities brimming with wealth hidden deep within the unforgiving jungle. These rumors ignited a profound interest in Percy for a vanished civilization, concealed somewhere in the Amazon, which he himself named the City of Z, and later associated with the legend of El Dorado. An obsession was beginning to take hold in him to find that mythical lost city, the same obsession that had poisoned New World conquistadors centuries earlier. The earliest known attempt to find El Dorado dates back to the 1530s, when the Spanish conquistador Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada, founder of modern-day Bogotá, led an expedition in search of wealth and gold that brought him to the Cundiboyacense highlands, the territory of the Muisca people, where those golden rituals were performed. Quesada had been tasked with finding a route to Peru through the Andes, a mountain range that had historically been an obstacle for Spanish conquistadors in their particular crusade for gold. In 1536, he departed from Santa Marta with a contingent of 700 men. However, rumors soon reached him that completely altered his course. When they ventured further south and encountered the Muisca people, they saw how they used gold merely as a decorative material, and not as something valuable in itself. Quesada violently interrogated members of the tribe, who told him about the ceremony involving their leader bathed in gold as part of a connection with their gods. Doubting the truth of their words, Quesada deemed it only part of the story. That golden man must have been a king of gold who, as such, must have lived in a kingdom of gold. The concept of a lost city of gold had been conceived, and the fever to find it spread like a virus among the Spanish conquistadors. In February 1541, 4 years after Quesada's expedition, Gonzalo Pizarro and Francisco de Orellana set out from Quito, Peru, driven by the ambition to find El Dorado. Their expedition, comprising some 300 conquistadors and 4,000 enslaved people, was the largest to date. According to their sources, the mythical city lay southeast of Ecuador, where the Amazon rainforest begins. They were among the first Europeans to venture into the heart of that relentless jungle. For months, the expedition advanced through the forest, interrogating and torturing every native they encountered, demanding they reveal the location of El Dorado. By the end of the year, their situation was dire. Many had perished, and virtually all the animals accompanying them had been consumed. But, by fortune or misfortune, when they were about to retreat, the expedition encountered a tribal leader who told them exactly what they wanted to hear. They were close to El Dorado. They just had to follow the river downstream. With renewed hopes, Pizarro sent Francisco de Orellana and others to gather provisions and then returned to the already exhausted party. In December 1541, Orellana set out with his group, and although they did find food, he did not keep his promise to return. Instead, Orellana became the first European to navigate the Amazon River, following it to its mouth at the Atlantic Ocean, which he reached 8 months later after covering nearly 5,000 kilometers. During this journey, he described highly developed civilizations with fortified cities along the river he had named. Upon his return to Spain, Francisco de Orellana was celebrated as a hero by King Charles I of Spain. Yet his mind was fixed on one thing: returning to America to find El Dorado, which he claimed he had come close to discovering. He vowed to the crown that if they funded his expedition, he would deliver the lost city of gold to the Spanish kingdom. His persuasion succeeded, and in May 1545 he returned to the New World, heading for the coast of Brazil. With 4 ships, 300 men, and materials to build 2 additional boats to navigate upriver, Orellana set out. Yet despite his prior experience, the indecipherable network of tributaries at the river's mouth left him lost. Orellana never found the entrance to the Amazon. After wandering aimlessly for over 400 kilometers, the expedition ended before it truly began. Only 40 of the 300 men survived to return home after an epidemic ravaged the party. Orellana himself was accused of fabricating his tales to avoid being charged with treason by Pizarro for abandoning the expedition. The disillusionment from this failed attempt dampened hopes of finding the lost city. But the legend persisted with enough force to inspire one of the most dramatic chapters in the search for El Dorado. In 1559, the Spanish conquistador Pedro de Ursua was chosen to lead a new expedition to find the great city of gold. 300 soldiers and hundreds of enslaved Peruvians were forced into the depths of the Amazon rainforest to chase the echoes of a myth. A climate of resentment and rage over the prospect of dying in that jungle quickly reached a breaking point of no return. At some point during the poorly organized expedition, Lope de Aguirre saw an opportunity to establish himself as the leader. He and a small group of rebels murdered Pedro de Ursua to take control of the search for the fabled Kingdom of Gold. But they had killed a representative of the King of Spain, a betrayal they could not escape. To avoid the inevitable death penalty, the self-proclaimed Prince of Liberty drafted a letter renouncing his loyalty to King Philip II, defying the authority of the crown and declaring independence from Spain. Aguirre had become the king of his own empire, a kingdom driven by a morbid obsession with finding El Dorado, leaving behind a chilling trail of blood. Executions and torture of natives and anyone who showed disloyalty became the norm. The search for the lost city had transformed into a reign of terror deep within the jungle. His party found absolutely nothing. No trace of the Golden City. Finally, in 1561, the man now nicknamed Loco Pinto was captured by royal forces in Venezuela, where he was executed and dismembered for his betrayal. Yet the story of the Golden City did not end with him. One of the most famous and significant quests for El Dorado was undertaken by the renowned explorer Sir Walter Raleigh at the end of the 16th century. In 1594, the English sailor and politician learned that for decades, the Spanish had been unsuccessfully searching for a legendary city bathed in gold. Fascinated by the tales, Raleigh set out to be the one to discover this kingdom and secure English dominance in the New World. In the name of Queen Elizabeth I, Raleigh set sail for the Americas to conquer El Dorado and claim its riches for the English crown. The expedition first stopped in Trinidad, where they captured the Spanish officer Antonio de Berrio, the husband of Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada's niece. Jiménez de Quesada had launched the first search for El Dorado decades earlier. Raleigh considered Berrio an obstacle to his mission and detained him to extract information about the supposed routes to the lands of gold. The expedition's goal was to locate the legendary Lake Parima, said to lie somewhere in Venezuela, with the lost city on its shores. The English party navigated the Orinoco River, attempting to gather clues from natives, whose trust they earned by proclaiming themselves enemies of the Spanish. However, heavy rains soon forced the expedition to retreat. Raleigh returned to England empty-handed, but the writings he published about his quest for the mythical Golden City further fueled the legend in Europe. 8 years later, in 1603, after the death of Queen Elizabeth I, Raleigh fell out of favor under the rule of the new king. James I sought peace with Spain, and Raleigh's actions, particularly his abduction of Berrio, became a significant issue. The king accused him of conspiracy, and Raleigh was imprisoned in the Tower of London for 13 years. He was released in 1616 to organize a second expedition to South America, which, though seemingly impossible, proved even more disastrous than the first. Raleigh fell ill and remained at the base camp in Trinidad, sending a party led by his friend Lawrence Keymis to venture once more into the Orinoco River and its tributaries in search of El Dorado. However, when Keymis and his men encountered a Spanish fort along the river, despite the king's explicit orders to avoid conflict following the fragile peace between the two nations, the situation escalated into a confrontation. Raleigh's own son was killed in the ensuing battle. Devastated by the skirmish and without finding a single trace of the lost city, Raleigh abandoned the expedition and returned to England, fully aware of what awaited him there. His failure to comply with the king's directive to avoid clashes with the Spanish sealed his fate. Upon his return, James I ordered his execution for high treason, and Raleigh was beheaded in the courtyard of Westminster Palace one October morning in 1618. It was a political gesture to appease Spain and strengthen diplomatic ties between the two crowns, but it marked yet another tragic end in the search for the Golden Kingdom. Raleigh's obsession had cost him his life and his son's. El Dorado seemed to be a curse for anyone who sought it. The fear of that place began to outweigh the ambition for its wealth. Finally, much later, after countless expeditions that ended in failure time and again, a German naturalist and explorer marked the end of the myth of El Dorado. In 1799, Alexander von Humboldt embarked on a 5-year expedition across the continent to document its flora, fauna, and indigenous cultures, with a focus rooted for the first time in the exploration of these lands in the principles of modern science. During his travels, Alexander took an interest in the legends of El Dorado, exploring how, over the centuries, European explorers had pursued this mythical kingdom of gold. He sought to investigate the legend from a rational perspective. Alexander consulted local indigenous communities and reviewed historical accounts from chroniclers who had accompanied explorers in their searches for El Dorado. He concluded that the myth had been distorted over time, fueled by vague descriptions and rumors that took on different forms in various regions. Exploring the Orinoco River region and confirming that the rivers and territories historically associated with El Dorado's location were inhospitable, with no trace of the wealth described in the legends, he declared that the very idea of a golden kingdom was pure fantasy. There was nothing about the legend that could stand up to scrutiny. Upon his return to Europe, Alexander wrote several works addressing the myth of El Dorado, describing it as a product of European imagination and greed rather than a tangible reality. His rational approach definitively discredited the myth in the eyes of the scientific community and the vast majority of the European public, putting an end to centuries of frustrated searches. The naturalist demonstrated that the true wealth of the Americas lay in their diversity, a vision that began to revolutionize Europe's perception of a continent that had until then been seen merely as a gold mine. Alexander had written the final chapter in that story. All those who had ventured into the heart of the American forests had done nothing but chase ghosts. There was no golden city waiting to be discovered. The search for El Dorado seemed to have come to an end. Exhausted physically and mentally by his relentless expeditions into the Amazon jungle, with hope nearly extinguished as he realized that all previous journeys over the centuries had ended in failure and yielded no concrete evidence of the lost city he so desperately sought, Fawcett abandoned his personal crusade to discover El Dorado. However, that same year, in 1913, National Geographic published an issue featuring a discovery that reignited his hopes. American explorer Hiram Bingham had traveled to Peru, drawn by an interest in exploring Inca ruins, the most extensive empire of pre-Columbian America. Bingham contacted local farmers who spoke of ruins located on a mountain called Machu Picchu, a name meaning Old Mountain in Quechua. Guided by locals, in July 1911, Bingham climbed the mountain and upon reaching the summit, gazed upon a breathtaking Inca citadel cloaked in vegetation. Temples, agricultural terraces, dwellings, and an intricate network of roads and water channels. The undeniable complexity of its construction revealed the archaeological significance of the site. A remote Inca city built at more than 2,400 meters above sea level, surrounded by mountains and dense jungle. Bingham had unveiled the ruins of Machu Picchu to the world, propelling the site to global fame and, above all, reviving Fawcett's spirit. The revelation of this ancient Inca city, hidden in the Peruvian jungle and unknown to the outside world, rekindled his hope that what he called the City Z might exist somewhere still unexplored in the Amazon. The discovery by Bingham and the renewed global interest in ancient civilizations following the media storm over the grandeur of these ruins spurred Fawcett to resume his search. Thus, he traveled to Brazil to investigate the National Library in Rio de Janeiro, seeking ancient documents that might support his theories about a lost civilization in the Amazon. Fawcett examined maps, colonial chronicles, and explorers' accounts with the hope of uncovering a new path to the City of Gold. After encountering many dead ends, he came across a Portuguese document known as Manuscript 512, dated to the 18th century. Comprising 10 pages, it was written as an expedition report. A letter recounting the discovery, deep within the Amazon, of the ruins of an unknown city seemingly belonging to a highly developed civilization. According to the account, while searching for gold mines and precious stones, Portuguese explorers stumbled upon the remains of an empire with wide avenues, arches, and columns reminiscent of ancient Greece. Inscriptions carved into the walls in an unknown language, underground tunnels, and colossal golden statues. Manuscript 512 further fueled Fawcett's obsession with the mythical lost city. Although it did not explicitly mention El Dorado, its description of an advanced civilization in the heart of the Brazilian jungle perfectly aligned with the image he had envisioned. All his theories seemed validated by that document. But just as he was preparing for a new expedition to this uncharted terrain, convinced he was ever closer to finding the fabled lost city, the world plunged into darkness. In July 1914, World War I erupted, and Fawcett's life took a sharp turn. With the outbreak of the conflict, he served in the British Army and was stationed in France, where he earned respect and admiration for his courage and leadership, eventually attaining the rank of lieutenant colonel. Despite being far from his dream, the brutality of war only deepened his belief in the importance of discovering that civilization. Amid the shadows threatening society, El Dorado could become a symbol for humanity, a form of idealism that strengthened his resolve. He was certain where his destiny lay when the world emerged from the ashes. After the war ended in 1918, Fawcett returned to England more determined than ever. The prestige and fame he had gained during the war eased his path to securing funding. This network of connections, coupled with the public's hunger for tales of adventure and exploration following the dark years of war, became his ticket to glory. In search of sponsors, and with England severely weakened by the economic collapse caused by the war, Fawcett traveled to New York City, where he managed to garner significant attention. His magnetic speeches convinced various scientific institutions and, above all, the National American Newspaper. The American Newspaper Alliance proposed becoming Fawcett's sponsor in exchange for periodic letters detailing the progress of his expedition. Readers would eagerly await them, sales would soar, and he would have all the financial resources he needed. Everyone would benefit from the deal. With the funding secured, in 1925, Fawcett organized a new expedition accompanied by his son Jack and Jack's friend Raleigh Rimmel. Confident in his enhanced experience and knowledge, they ventured into the heart of the Amazon jungle. They were determined to find the lost city of gold. All his studies pointed to one location. El Dorado lay near the Xingu River in the state of Mato Grosso. Somewhere along the 1,800 kilometers of this Amazon tributary had to be the kingdom that so many had pursued for centuries. In January, the three departed from New York to Brazil, seen off with great anticipation. Even before it began, the expedition had become a mass phenomenon. The public was eager to follow the day-to-day journey of these men who promised to uncover the ashes of an ancient lost civilization. Upon arriving in Rio de Janeiro, they began their journey to the country's interior. Over 1,500 kilometers took them to the threshold of the jungle, where Fawcett believed they would find the city. Each step of the journey was chronicled in the letters Fawcett had promised to the American newspapers. Then came the letter dated May 29, 1925. Addressed to his wife, it announced that they were in good health and about to enter uncharted territory. That letter marked the last contact ever received from the three men. Communication ceased. Fawcett, his son, and Raleigh had vanished into the jungle. For months, the world waited for news of the explorers, trying to fend off despair. A letter, any sign that they were still alive, would suffice. But 2 years later, silence prevailed. Numerous rescue expeditions were launched into the region, yet none found any trace of their whereabouts. The bodies were never recovered. No one knows what became of those three men or what fate awaited them in the jungle that had once again claimed the lives of those who dared to seek its mysteries. Over time, Fawcett became a legendary figure, and his search for the City Z turned into a romantic symbol of the last great exploration of uncharted lands. 20 years later, in 1955, the New York Times published an article revealing that Fawcett's quest had inspired more expeditions than the search for El Dorado itself over the centuries. Since then, the pursuit of the lost city has been depicted in countless artistic creations, magnifying the myth and the mysteries surrounding this hypothetical civilization. The most likely answer is that El Dorado never existed as Europeans had imagined it. The legend arose from exaggerated accounts of rituals, inflated over centuries by the greed of conquistadors. For hundreds of years, their mission justified the plundering and genocide of the rightful inhabitants of those lands. The horrors committed in the name of Christianity, civilization, and wealth came at too great a cost. No city of gold is worth so much suffering. Yet El Dorado, like a strange collective dream, remains a symbol of the eternal pursuit of the unattainable. A myth that shows us that sometimes the search itself defines what it means to be human. A testament to what we were willing to sacrifice to reach it. A city, a treasure, or perhaps just an ideal that transcended gold. A dream of riches, glory, and eternal power. The embodiment of that innate human desire to reach for something beyond what we can see. A reflection of the blurred line between legend and reality. Perhaps El Dorado was never meant to appear on a map, but to endure in humanity's will to explore, discover, and transcend.